We were just trying to take care of the people that showed up outside, and we got them hooked up outside at the picnic table with my iPad. So
Wow. No Jumbotron.
we're just trying to take care of the people that showed up outside, and we got them hooked up outside at the picnic table with my iPad. So
Okay.
all right. So are we ready to get started? You're out live.
Okay, Kate, it's out on YouTube, so
Okay.
I will pass it off to you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the Friends of Historic Rochester annual meeting. Friends of Historic Rochester is an all-volunteer organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the historic heritage of the town of Rochester in Ulster County. Founded in 1987, the Friends of Historic Rochester is a nonprofit organization with a 501c3 status. The Friends of Historic Rochester Museum, located at 12 Main Street in Accord, New York, is a repository for our collection of local materials, including documents, books, oral histories, genealogical information, and much more. It is named in the memory of Percy Gasley and Eleanor Rosencrantz, two of the leading lights in the Friends of Historic Rochester, who helped spearhead the establishment of the museum. The museum and library are at the center of the Friends of Historic Rochester activities. Their extensive resources include the Eleanor Rosencrantz genealogical collection and many family reports compiled from the internet. Anyone is welcome to become a member of Friends of Historic Rochester. Basic annual dues are $25, which includes a subscription to our quarterly publication on local history, The Accordion. If interested, please check out our website at friendsofrochester.org. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Beginning September 22nd, 2021, the museum will be open from 1 to 3 on Wednesdays or by appointment for all visitors. For a sneak peek of what we have to offer and how you can get involved, mark your calendars for our upcoming event, Heritage Day, that's going to be held October 2nd, 2021, beginning at 11 o'clock a.m., located on Main Street, Accord. You don't want to miss out on this event. Before we begin our presentation, we must enter into the minutes the following. From a member of the board, I need a motion on the floor for the following. Slate of officers: President Kathleen Gumberg, Vice President Betsy Tully, Secretary Ashley Sweeney, Treasurer Bethany Denon, Board of Directors, Membership Anne Marie Maloney, Buildings and Grounds Renee Ciardi, Accordion Editor Alice Cross, Members at Large Linda Martin, Lindsay Arnold, Jay Anaya, William DeJager, Advisory Board Members Robert Anderberg, Mike Baden, Barbara Mullins, Barbara Robatello, Jack Schoonmaker, Beth Smith, and Margaret Wright. So I need a motion to accept the slate of officers and board of directors.
I'll make that motion, Kate. Mike Baden.
And a second.
I'll second it. Neil Zimmerman.
Is there any other nominations? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Motion approved. So at this time, I would like to thank Evan Pritchard and Bill DeGraw for being here tonight to present us with the history of Native American culture. And for our audience, please sit back and enjoy. And whoever would like to go first, feel free to start.
I guess I could kick it off first, Bill DeGraw. So what we're entitling this, I'm entitling my part of the talk is Lenni Lenape. A culture, a people, a nation that once thrived here. The word Lenni Lenape comes from two root words. Lenni, which means a genuine or pure or real, original, and Lenape, which is a person, people. So they call themselves the Lenni Lenape, which literally means a men of men, and is translated directly through the language as the original peoples. Other indigenous peoples around were referred to as Lenape, which were, the peoples around them. But the Lenni Lenape were they considered themselves the original people. They also are known, even through their own folks now, their own peoples now, as a Delaware nations. The original root of the word Delaware comes from Thomas West, who was the first English colonial governor of Virginia. His title was a Baron or Lord Delaware, which was applied to the peoples that lived around the area, which ran from northern Delaware up through the state of New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, into the southern tier of New York, as far up as Catskill, New York. So they were named that through European contact, and some of the folks still call themselves the Delaware Nation, which absolutely is their right. They, whether you call them indigenous peoples, natives, American Indians, these are some of the names which they refer to themselves as. But I think the key to this is, and what I would like to focus on tonight in my part of the presentation, is that these folks were people who lived here in this area that we live in, the town. Could you ever turn that down? That's echoing up here. These were communities. These weren't just, as many of the European history books portray them as wild men in the forests, and Europeans basically were saving them from themselves, culture civilizing them. These were folks that were living in communities. They had their villages. They were individual homes, and they were nothing short of cities in some of the communities that were built down in the Port Jervis area. They're very large groups of folks. They raised their families here. They were raising their kids, their husbands, wives, their mothers, fathers. These were real communities. They left behind their graves. They buried their dead here. They didn't just leave them to lay in the forest. They were very respectful. We still, some of these, the graveyards, the burial mounds are still here today. These folks played games, and not just small games. These folks played nationwide games, so very, very close to some of our, to the size of some of the games that we have today in areas. When the Dutch were here and they witnessed some of these games, they named these areas called Kotspens. And you'll see still in our area today, there's at least 3 locally, one in Saugerties called Kotspen. It's a community up in northern part of the county of Ulster. Down near Port Jervis, there is identified a Kotspen there, and as well as Kingston, the Broadway area from uptown heading down towards the Rondout Creek was a huge playing field, 1.5 miles long, where hundreds of men would show up for these games. The Dutch were awestruck by some of the things that they saw these native folks doing. And the Crossman translated, it means tennis court, which is a ball field, if you will. Religion, they had absolute theology, beliefs systems. Many of the older writings were a type of a monotheistic religion. They were praying to a creator God for what they had, who they referred to as Kisholamon Wong. And so it was a very close, when a lot of the European nations sent over their priests, the folks here to convert the native populations. Their belief systems were were close to what the Europeans were believing, the monotheism, the belief in a single creator. A lot of the traditions that the churches they recognized, and they were fairly quickly converted to Christianity, the ones that would. So that, through not only the upper nations, but nations in this area. So the evidences of these people around us still, sometimes you'll see some New York State historic landmarks that, for instance, in Warsing, there's a site there where there was a longhouse, which was extended wigwam, probably for the Esopus peoples. And sometimes there's just a name of a location identifies these folks. Or the Patawton, Metacahonks, or Warsink, the Minisink. These are names we recognize today that reflect that these people were here. They were living in these communities. These people were from a dialect of the Lenni Lenape. Locally, they were the Esopus Munsee. The Munsee were the northern part of the nation. The Unami were the southern half of the nation, basically from south, from Jersey south, for the Unami. But up here was the Munsee. Some of the areas around here that aren't native, like for instance, we have the Danskammer. Folks know that the power plant down there is named Danskammer. That name was a Dutch name that meant dance chamber, where they saw the native nations and so the Delaware Nation come together in these huge festivals of dance and celebration in that area along the Hudson River. And also Pound Ridge is another area down in Westchester County. Its name, most people don't know why, but it was an impoundment where the Native Americans actually were raising animals for meat. They would impound the deer, and when they needed the meat, they would go and they would butcher them. Some places in the area that once stood that stand now where native towns and villages were. Kingston, we know, is a native village. New Paltz, they have excavated there and found wigwams in that area, right in the old historic districts. Margaretville, and probably areas like Wiltmead and where near the High Falls along Lucas Avenue, the High Falls area. Shawano, we know there was a castle there up into the late 1800s. We also know that there was not only a lot of agriculture going on with the Lenni Lenape in the area. Many of the areas that are cultivated today were cultivated prior to European contact. These folks had built had cleared the fields for planting crops. Like I said, they were actually raising animals, and the food here in abundance could support a large number of folks. If we know what we're looking for when we're in the woods today, we can see a lot of edible plants, a lot of edible mushrooms that these folks easily could harvest if we're in plenty in the woods around these areas in the forests. The medicines in the area, basically, and when you study the plants in the area, the medicinal value of these plants is phenomenal. Almost every plant out there has some medicinal use, whether external or internal, for people to better themselves with. And if we understood that, it really lends a lot of credence to these folks and the communities and what they had. The numbers that this area could have supported is tremendous, and the more archaeological evidence is surfacing all the time that there were massive native populations here, not just a few scattered folks running through the wilderness. With that, so that's pretty much an overview of what I have for the Delaware Nation. I don't want to take too much time, but I'd like to introduce Evan Pritchard, who is a scholar when it comes to the Native American studies. He's a linguist. And Evan, I'd like to just turn it over to you to take this talk from here.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bill. Thanks very much. It's great to hear you. Always love to hear you speak about these the people of this land. And so anyway, I'm actually Micmac or Mi'kmaq by birth, but I married into Minisink Munsee, and it's really the same culture in a different place. You mentioned Port Jervis, and so I mean, I'm split up, but that would run in my son's family. And I've been here a long time, and it was known that when you do ceremony, you really need to know who was there first, the ancestors of the land. And so, I've been writing many books now on Munsee culture and spirituality and language. So what I focused on was the rivers around Rochester, town of Rochester, which originally was much larger and until recently included Warsing. And so that was my original thought, was just show what names, the original native names of these rivers, as best as could be surmised. And also then, after talking to you, Bill, I made a few maps and comments about villages. So that's towards the end. So mainly I want to show this PowerPoint because it has lots of maps with some translations. Okay, so my first question, can people see that? Mike, can you see anything?
Yes.
Yes,
Yep.
you have a
Yep,
Town of Rochester Revisited.
yep, there you go. You're good, Evan. We see it.
Okay, good. That's the hard part. Now I can relax. So I'm mentioning, honoring and mentioning, or shouting out, as they say today, Bill DeGraw and Michael Coleman, who helped me with the maps, like providing me with underlay maps, foundation maps. Andrew Faust, I hope shows and says a few words about rivers and sustainability. And Wilton Duckworth, of course, whose idea this whole thing was. So if it doesn't work out, you can blame Wilton. But, he asked me that this is, said this is what we need. I said, okay, I'll do it. And, I expect at least 1 year of corn in payment. Now I'm going to click. Okay, so this is, I'm going to click down. Okay, so this is a map. You can see it was from the internet. That's Ulster County, but this is Ulster County here, but this is the original Rochester, included Neversink until 1798 and Middletown until 1798. But then, Rochester itself, this whole thing was launched in 1703. And that's what all the signs say as you're driving into town. But there's a lot those signs don't tell you. It's just, established 1703 for this entire area. But then Neversink and Middletown split off. And then in 1806, Warsing split off. And then in 1853, Gardner split off. So mainly I'm going to focus on the original Rochester territory, which is, well, that is still Rochester, but also then on Warsing. So Queen Anne's Rochester patent, and a patent is a license to make treaties with Native Americans. In this case, it was the Munsee, and it was a very large territory. And you see in red, the town of Rochester as it is today. You see Ulster County was many times its present size, and that was created in 1685. That was about the time of the passing of Mama Nukwe, who was the great Sumsqua, or sachem of the Esopus Munsee. There was a plague of smallpox and malaria. Neversink in Middletown broke off 1798. Warsing broke off only 8 years later. Gardner didn't break off till 1853. So Rochester, Warsing, and Gardner, all part of that patent, are still in Ulster County. So we'll focus on that. The map highlights the whole of Rochester, 1799. And notice it takes up about a quarter of Ulster County. And that's a very large area, even when you're just including the bare minimum. But the thing is that there is a lot of history, a lot of study that needs to be done, because we know that there were a lot of Munsee villages, and we have it as part of our folklore, but there's very little, research that would prove beyond the shadow of a doubt most of it, which is very unusual. Just the degree of uncertainty. So Warsing, by the way, in itself was the distinctive council fire district, or what you might call a nation, within the Esopus Munsee Commonwealth or Confederacy. So Warsing is rich with native history, and it's more clearly preserved. Now the Rochester part was part of the main, what we call War in a Wong Kong, Esopus Muncie. And so mostly there wasn't a lot of sense of labeling and saying, you know, this is us and that's you, but it was part of the main group, a very large group. So here is boiling it down to its basics. I've done a lot of thinking, a lot of research on the rivers, and I've come to the conclusion that these three rivers were the main ones, and that they were contained, well, you know, there was had native names to them as a whole. So Cahock-Sink or the Cahock-Sink Kill, excuse me, is what you see in all the Dutch and English records for a long time. And I have a copy of a deed from 1701 that for land that calls it Cahock-Sink Kill for the Rondout. So this entire section that goes through Rochester was called Cahock-Sink Kill. And of course, Cahock-Sink is also the original name of Kerhonkson. And here in red is the Minisink Trail, and that's an actual trail. Minisink means it goes to that island near Port Jervis. But here, there's this crossing island here, which I'm going to focus on. It seemed to be a focus, geographical focus of the region in Rochester. Also marked a Wasting Kill, which is a reconstruction, and Cahock-Sink Kill, which is the Cahock-Sink today. So, and here's another thing, Anchor-Ups Kill instead of Verneuil Kill. So here we have the Rondout you're familiar with, but Metacahans, I believe, was applied to the entire river of what is Metacahans, and this means a trout stream that is shaded by pine boughs. And over further west, we have Manasasink, and that goes along this whole part here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Then it cuts in here, and they meet here, and then the Manasasink continues to this island. And that island, there's actually 3 little stony islands even today. It's a crossing place for the Minisink Trail over what is actually the Manasasink Creek there, running into the Rondout. So boiling it down, making it as simple as I can, there's these 3 rivers. And the Cahock-Sink, not so problematic. But the Manasasink and the Metacahans, I think, are very important place names that are very poetic and very descriptive and still somewhat intact. And so I'd like to see, you know, people consider raising awareness about the relationship between these places and their rivers. Now, they, like I say, this fording place is a stony island which still exists. And the river it crosses would have been called the Manasasink, island place of small stones. And that is also the name of the island. And it's a few yards from the confluence, 100 yards from the confluence of the Cahock-Sink, in other words, the Rondout. And a half mile to the west is the confluence of the Metacahans and that same stream. So there's these 3, and that hopefully, you know, makes it very simple. And again, I want people to consider what it would be like to have these 3 rivers somehow, at least subtitles like they do in Wales. They have the, both the English and the Welsh words on the street signs. I think that would be kind of interesting. Okay, so again, here's the same map and shows the major 3 rivers. And here is a photograph of the small stony island. That's really the one I feel is most likely have been the crossing island for various reasons. But in most of the year, it's fairly stony with small stones. And so Manasasink, if you took Man as being an island, then Asatin is a small stone or small stones, and then the place. So it's plural. To the island with many small stones. And here's the photograph, recent photograph. To the left, right over here, this is the beginning of a land, is the mustering fields, or the fields for military practice under the Dutch and then the English, and it continued to be used that way for like over 100 years. And I'll go into why they might have done that later. But this is the northern part. Here's another island with small stones to the north of 209. was important that these important crossing islands were used for meeting places or rendezvous. So they had alternative islands for crossing. So if one was closed for such meetings, then it wouldn't disturb traffic. Now, what's interesting is on the right, you have, this is deadwood mostly from the hurricane, driftwood. But this is not an island. This is a spit of land that cuts south. This is the Rondout to the right. It's curving around. And here's this Monosussink River cutting in, and they meet way back here. So this long spit of land would have been a wonderful trading spot during peaceful times early on with the Dutch. And it gives access to the crossing islands. But also, if you follow it along, you get to the confluence of the Monosussink with what we call the Rondout. And on the other side, on the eastern bank, you find the mouths of the Sanders Kill and the Stony Kill. And so all the canoe-based travel, they could all meet at this place and trade. And that would have been, of course, before the Dutch took up arms in 1661. Now here's the training field I mentioned. There's a sign, and I read in the Bluestone today about a whole new initiative to restore existing signs, and I'm all for that, and also for making new signs, because there's a whole lot of the history in Rochester, which would be of great interest if if people made signs and people knew. So it says site of training field, colonial militia in the French and Indian and Revolutionary Wars met for training in the field at this place. Well, if you're just driving on the highway, you see that, you don't think anything about it. Of course, they had to have training somewhere, but then you look at it in the context of the times, and it's a totally different interpretation. Now, by the way, first of all, when you add up these different time periods mentioned, you have the colonial militia, which went 1661 to 1754, and then the French and Indian, 1754 to 1763, and then followed by the Revolutionary War, 76 to 81. And they're meeting continually or sporadically at this place to train using arms. So what does that mean? Well, ask anybody familiar with Native history, and we'll say we're pretty sure that they were mustering in plain sight of this important Native American trail crossing for a very good reason. One, it kept the Esopus west of the crossing, south and west, keeping them away from Kingston. Two, it shows military strength in a similar way that a military parade shows the other rivals exactly what they have to deal with. That's a universal. Three, to watch for canoe flotillas coming down the Rondout Kill all the way up from way up in the mountains, Pisco Mountain, all the way down. Wherever there's native people, they could come and invade. Not that they did, but they were very concerned about that. So it's a good spot to watch for flotillas. Four, having this training here prevent Esopus people from using the field itself and the surrounding fields as well. There's quite a large area that could have been a cornfield or a village site. Could have been, again, an open, exposed village site, but that could be a good trading site. Five, to be able to shoot at or near Esopus as they either walked by or paddled by with plausible deniability. Again, talking with people familiar with the period and the history of the Dutch, there were moments when that seems very plausible. And so I just defend that theory. Okay, 6, after May of 1665, when there was a treaty that the Dutch agreed to, the Esopus agreed to, and Oritami agreed to it, but it said they took the land by right of conquest. Now, whenever you take the land by right of conquest, you have to defend it. And so that treaty was imposed on the Esopus. And then later in the year, Nichols Treaty under the English agreed to pay for disputed land. So, whether it was really how long it took to resolve, we don't know, but there was some sketchy history there in terms of what the terms were. But a training field with lots of armed Dutch soldiers would have come in handy. So not likely, but during the Revolutionary War, the Royalist Mohawk and some of their less numerous Lenape allies, under the leadership of Captain Joseph Brant, could have used this stream as a route of attack during the Revolutionary War. And they didn't actually, but it must have seemed very possible. This is an aerial view. The red dot is this Stony Island spot, was the crossing of the Minisink Trail, and Island of Stones, Monosasing Creek is here. It's called Rondout Creek, a northern branch. I feel that most of the current place names are confusing and don't really seem to ring true. And I don't feel that this can be called a branch of the Rondout. That's my opinion. It actually, to me, is the Monosasing rolling into the Rondout, but that's something everyone can discuss and come to decisions on. Now, here's a map of the same area and showing you the 3 crossing islands. That's how they are now. And there may have been only one before the Monosasing Island, but you see this creek comes way out. It's a long spit of land. And there's the confluence. The confluences are always important to Native people because they're canoe people. Southeast of the crossing point. So the photo below shows, on the lower right, shows one of several places where Minisink Trail follows the edge of the Rondout Creek or river, because it was part of a portage route from Kingston, specifically where 28 and 209 meet. That was part of the a larger trail, all the way to Wawarsing. So you see, you can imagine, without the cars and all the mighty bridges, there's a trail that went right along here. And I wrote about this in Native New Yorkers in 2002, about how mastodons had probably created this trail because it's so, prominent trails. They have mastodons are like elephants that can make large trails quickly, and they follow the waterways. And this would have been typical. So here on the left is this Minisink Trail as it goes right along this river and follows its shoreline. So that's Monosasing Kill again in the north. Now this is another aerial photo, but it shows the bend in the Rondout. It's a sharp bend, and here's where that river comes in. It actually goes all the way out here to the right, the path of Minisink Trail. Oh, there was now 3 stony islands here, but Route 209 follows roughly the corridor of the Minisink Trail, but I'll show you that it often varies, and it's always marked where it varies. Now, this is a town of Rochester, inside the red outline, and the blue lines are the rivers, and so that was provided to me by our friend, and I also included a little bit of what's south of there, but I expand on that later. It shows the major rivers and streams with their native names as they might be reconstructed. Okay, so there's a lot of them, and they all have names. Some of them are native, and some is really hard to say, but some we just haven't gotten beyond the English. So these are the way the rivers were named in the 1660s or so. And in the parenthesis, I put the settler names, most of which you know. And so further research would be required to find their original names. The ones with asterisks are ones, blue asterisks, are ones that I've reconstructed using common sense. The central hub of land and water routes was this Monosasing Island. Now that's marked Mongbacchus Creek. And Mongbacchus, as I'll explain, is actually European. And where it converges, that red spot is that crossing. And I marked it with M for Monosasing Island. Just across from this is the town of Accord. And west of the island is the confluence of Metacons and Monosasing. Starting from the right, Coxsink Creek, and I'm talking about here, along the right side of the map, from a high place. The source is near Minnewaska at about 3,000 feet. So it comes in this way from the corner of Rochester, very high elevation, and rolls down to the Rondout, and it south of, past High Falls. Now, Awasting means on the other side or a place beyond. And the creek was also probably called Awasting as it comes from Awasting, Lake Awasting. And Sam's Point is Iosco-Wasting, meaning it wears the buckhorns from the other side. But somebody has speculated it means like it looks like the spirit world, which is the other side. or beyond, or heavenly. And if you go there, you'll see what I mean. It's quite heavenly in places. Both lake and the stream were bought by the D&H Canal to supply water for the canal. And, Bill Merchant told me that. The original name of the Sanders Kill has been lost, but it drains into the Rondout at a court. Now, Stony Creek is stony and would probably have been called a similar name by the natives. For example, Asin Awan would be a stony tributary. It also runs into the Rondout at a court. Then you have the Rondout, of course, which I've talked about, and it has a long and twisting path. So then here's a close-up. Now the word, why is Wasting likely for this Lake of Wasting, and why would this Peters Kill be a Wasting Creek? Well, on September 10th of 1684, there was a deed to Governor Thomas Dongan for a tract of land south of New Paltz Patent. The land extends from the Hudson westward to the foot of the high hills called Pithiskakar and Iaskawasing. Iaskawasing is Stamps Point, and Pithiskar is a peak in the Shawangunk, but we don't know which one. The name of the lake was Awasting, and then originally, and then changed to Big Pond, and then changed back on the 200th anniversary of the Dongan deed. So it's somewhat likely that the creek that flows from the Awasting Lake would also be called Awasting as well, but that's, something for further research. It's likely. So the other side of the Shawangunks from Sam's Point, but maybe have taken on the other meaning, like the other side, similar to the spirit world. So you have in the map, you have Awasting Creek entering the Rondout here, all within the boundaries of Rochester. So here's another Pompilio up here. Just the next river over to the left, the black dot and the circle K mark Keiserreich. Some people say Keiserreiche. It's a Dutch named Muncie Village site, or probable Muncie Village site, part of which is now a cemetery. And 100 steps west along the creek from, the Lucas Avenue, along what we call the cripple bush, which means broken or low-lying bushes, but also perhaps playfully indicating the creek itself is broken. You have Pompey's Cave. Now, Pompilio, which I published in Native New Yorkers, means a dry stream bed. And it's so unusual. The idea of a coincidence like that seems just impossible and preposterous, that, Pompey and Pompilio, and short for that's Pompey, but it means a dry stream bed in the Muncie language. And for much of the length to the cripple bush, the water runs underneath a dry stream bed in a cave, and a very distinctive feature. And so the natives might have said it's broken and called the entire stream Pompilio or Pompileo. And so you have Pompey's Cave. Now here on the right, you have a picture looking over the bridge on Route 1, Lucas Turnpike. You look down and this is a stream bed. It's all dry. And that's on the one side. I think that's might be the east side. And here's the west side here. It's a dry. And here's Pompey Cave Road. Now, you enter Pompey's Cave through a hole in the dry stream bed, which is exactly 100 paces to the right of the highway. So is that an accident? Like the old pirate maps used by the Esopus during early colonial Dutch period as a hiding place. That's for sure they would have. This bridge is where Elmendorf Turnpike forded Cripplebush Creek. Again, it wasn't hard to ford, there was no water. So Pompey's Cave Road is a horseshoe up and down a steep hill off the trail, which we call Lucas Turnpike. Many believe this road once led to an ideal village site. It had a strategic location where you could see enemies coming down the road, which would have been the trail down called Lucas Avenue. So there's a lookout when they were very favorable to lookouts. There was plenty of water a few yards away, because if you lower a bucket into the hole in the stream bed into the cave, you couldn't miss. There's so much water flowing through it year round that you'd always get water. It also served as a hiding place, which, again, I've often heard as of what they did. And I've been in there, and here's a picture on the left looking up the ladder. That ladder is not native made, but it's probably what they had. They probably made one. Here's the Bettenbar Cemetery in the middle. Again, it's a Dutch word from the Keiserreiche. Kaiser apparently was the family name, and the Reich, of course, means like the realm or the empire, and they were making fun of themselves, and I think in a humble way. And Pompey's Cave Road, you see that road off to the right actually leads pretty close to the cave. But if you follow that loop or horseshoe, there's a very old stone house on the top, but that's where would have been an ideal spot for a Muncie village. Okay, now this is nearby, okay, over here on the right, the Benton Bar Cemetery. And the creek bed runs through the cemetery and it's dry. But over on the left, I want you to look at this Het Kilitis Land at the Van Wagen in Homestead, also in Kaiserreiche. But it was built prior to 1725, and that's pretty early. You know, Rochester, I believe, founded 1703, which is early enough. But prior to, we don't know how old, but a mile from Pompey's Cave along Lucas Turnpike. Now, Het means the, and it's a fairly formal, not der, but het. It's a formal the article. And Kilitis, I believe, and again, I looked this up in Dutch dictionaries and whatnot, a kill is a stream. And so Kilitis, I believe, means a small stream. And a sopus means small stream. So what it means, I'm hearing myself back. What it means is I'm getting feedback. Okay, so it means the Esopus land. That's my theory, and others can show me other evidence. That's fine. I would love to know, but from right now, I translate it based on Dutch dictionaries, the land of the Esopus. So why would they name it that? Well, it must have been intense. There must have been lots of Esopus around. That's my theory, and hence the very formal Het Kilitis land. And so, you know, I know Bill has probably a different translation, and that's fine. We can discuss. But that's what I came up with. So I think that's very significant. Now, this is another blow up of the map. And here you see I added Wawarsing. Wawarsing has a much more easily traced water route naming history, and the names are more intact than in Rochester. But Rochester must have been equally occupied by the Muncie. And and I also extended it into High Falls, where you have the Wirraminik, which means a very good place to pick berries. And then Wigiwapo Creek, which means these, there would be homes by a series of white waterfalls. It also could mean that it's a series of waterfalls by the homes of white people. So it's a little hard to tell. And Sunkhatising is the name for the high falls itself, the double falls, you know, the higher and lower falls. Sunkhatising, very clear, means the council fire place at the head of the estuary, tributary, excuse me. So very clear that that was the council fire place, and also it is the head, you know, of the tide, so to speak, just up from Pompilium. So you see A is a chord, M is the crossing place, and this is Pine Bush. And let's see. Saunders Kill, I found the sign had knocked down in the storm. No name for the Saunders Kill as yet, should be researched. It runs south, between South Peterskill and the Stony Creek, and it enters Rondout at a chord right opposite the Manasasing, so it's important to our story. So here in the map, you see the crossing, and you see here, where is that? Okay, North Peterskill, same way. Cahoxing, place of wild geese. Now here you see, I don't know if everybody knows this, but it's pretty obvious. The symbol of the Rondout Valley School District is two geese, wild geese, and that's what Cahoxing or Kerhonkson means. And that's the mascot, wild geese. So I don't know if anybody ever made that connection, but there it is. Now, Metacahants means where the pine boughs cast shadows across the trout stream. It's in there. It's all in there. Meta is trout stream. Ku is pine trees. Haunts is shadows. And this, so that's what it says. So the three parts, there's a snaky upper part way up here, right on the edge of Rochester. And then the middle section is actually below where it is joined by the Rochester. So I like to think they would have named it Metacons. We don't know what the Rochester branch was called either, but I believe it had continued as Metacons, and the lower section from Flybrook continuing as Metacons until it reaches the Manasasing. Now, the Metacons Road runs the length of the original banks today, but it seems that developers have changed various names of the lower stream. So I'd like to see the road match the stream, and I would kind of like it if it were this beautiful, poetic Native American word. But that's just me. Other research indicated that Metacons ended its confluence at Manasasink, a few yards from the island. And then it all kind of makes sense, because the island would be, the thing it was named after. Now, the Manasasink has many different names, but it's in 4 sections. I like to see it as one whole creek. The upstream from the confluence with the Sapbush Creek. Don't know exactly. Well, here's Sapbush Creek, and here's where the Manasasink. This is also called Mambakas Creek, but Mambakas is not native. Manasasink is. So Sapbush is a very, very interesting word for the stream. There's a Sapbush Road at Chenango Forks in New York, which is where a lot of the Munsee people, the Esopus Munsee, went to as they were fleeing at various times in their history. The section below that confluence, where you see Petaukonk here in the red dot at the elbow there, the section after the second confluence, and the section downstream is the section with the island. So it's really is in 3 sections, but I like to see it all as with integrity of the Manasasink, because it leads to that island, the Stony Island. So it wouldn't make sense to just name the upper part Manasasink and not connect it. Now, the Metacons, Bear Creek, Flybrook, Sapbush all run into the Manasasink. Now, a sapbush is either a strand of sugar maples or a sugar bush, such as when families would go and camp and do maple sugaring. But there is an evergreen shrub called the rus. It's blocked, while having light yellow flowers and hairy dark red fruit. So there is a sapbush, and so might have been named after that. And again, research would be to find one of these sapbush trees or bushes in that area. Now, this is Petaukonk, again, a close-up where the arrow is, that red dot is Petaukonk, and is a waterfall along the Manasasink, I believe it's there, which is a Moravian mission in the 1600s. It means waterfalls where we make our prayers. And it was certainly a village and also a fort at one time, according to colonial records. The red dot with the PB in the circles, what's over here, that's Pine Bush, at a Munsee village site. Kurhangsen is a clever double Dutch word on Kahak Sink, or place of wild geese. But in Old Dutch, it sounds like it's saying where they go in for honking. Kurhangsen. This is a joke, okay? That's the planned words. This is a village site of the natives before the Dutch. And then there's Trout Creek to the west, which would have been called Metawan, which is a very common river name you find all over New York for any trout stream. So that's right over here, Trout Creek. It's all at the end of Rochester. So that covers a lot. Now, here's my famous photo of Petaukonk, which appeared in the Bluestone Press. I have many pictures of them, and I understand that it's no longer there, and I'd like to discuss that to see what we can do about that. I know it looks like the Wizard of Oz, and that's not my fault. But it's the hamlet of Petaukonk, near the waterfall we make our prayers. I placed that near the RV camp, but others, and Bill too, have placed it, I think, in a nearby place. But the research would show where the fort was and where the actual Moravian mission was. It's a reminder of Rochester's rich history. Now, in terms of the way it breaks down, it's Petaukonk, like Petauk is prayers, plural, and Konk is a waterfall, kind of rocky, like running down a side of rocks. Of course, Rochester is a fraction of what it was in 1799. So much of it has cut off, and a lot of it is now Wawarsing. And there you find lots of place names still intact. So right next to Lake Awasting is Tupatcoke, or Tupathcock. And as you see where my cursor is, this circle is that cauldron or hole in the earth on top of that mountain they called the Witch's Hole. Well, that's what the Dutch called everything. But Petaukonk is the same kind of native description. Tupatcoke refers to a cauldron of bubbling water that overflows. And I wrote about it in Native New Yorkers in 2002. And it's the same as what Witch's Hole is like. So they're really the same thing. So that's a very distinctive feature. And the river runs down right into the run down here at Wawarsing. Now, Palmagate, which is down in the lower right here, that's actually a Dutch word meaning palm gate and runs through Gardner. And it's inside the limits of the town of Rochester. Palmagate is a word that's seen a number of permutations. The river source is at the present day town of Rochester, but the source of the word lies further south near the Wallkill. The river runs through the Palmagate ravine, which lies close to Gertrude's Nose, the geological formation that climbers seem fond of. It's very good climbing, very legendary local place, Gertrude's Nose, and that's where the ravine is, and that's where Palmagate gets its name, but it must have had a native name before that. Sandberg Creek was named by the Dutch after the little mounds of sand found everywhere, but there was no Mr. Sandberg. Carl Sandburg in Chicago, that was 300 years later. Likely that the Munsee named it after this unusual feature, named it after the sand, presumably sandy tributary or Rechuan. The Vernoy family kept voluminous records, which I've dug through, but I didn't find a word about Native American place names and all that. They didn't seem to pay attention to that. So Vernoy Kill is a very large and important river. It must have had a memorable native name, and I feel personally sure it was Anchorage. We've thought about this for years. The most distinctive feature is the S-shaped canyon right before it merges with the Rondout, and which would easily have been built up as a fort, which apparently was called Anchorage. Now, anchor is a Dutch word for an 8-gallon keg of rum, but I can't explain that. But ops is short for Esopus, small river. So that would be over here is at Indian Hill, and you have Anchorage, the fort, Anchorage, the town, and Anchorage as the name of this particular big old river. Now, the confluence of Anchorage and the Rondout is called Wawarsing, which is the place where the water runs out. So the whole town is called Wawarsing, and the Munsee Nation was called Wawarsing, but specifically it's where the water runs out. It's the same place. North of that is Indian Hill, near Menacing Trail, also called Schoenenosburg, or Council Hill of the Shawnee. And the Shawnee were here. So we know that. They'd come up as allies of the Munsee. 7 Maple Street is there now. And to the west is where the Rondout makes a right turn at the confluence with the Sandberg Hill. And it still retains its name, and it still did then. They kept calling it, with the same name. But the major fork in the river was called Lackawak. A lack or a lek is a fork. And when you're doing native sign language and you show your forked fingers with your index and your middle fingers, and again, I refer to Tompkins, who is I think the best known book on sign language, the native sign. And you see this in the word Lackawanna in Pennsylvania. It means a forks in the river, forks of the Delaware, Lackawanna. There is a town a few miles away called Lackawak, and I'm talking about a few miles from Wawarsing. And there is a Lackawak Trail very nearby, which I think is a remnancy from an earlier time. The area was called Napanock also, which means the mouth of the river of fish. And any Algonquin will tell you that, although most of the guidebooks have it wrong. To the west is Sakonessing, a beautiful word, means a muddy place where the water comes out. That's in reference to Sandberg Creek too. And now that's where Ellenville is. So traveling north on Rondout Creek, and again, it's cutting north quickly. You see how it runs down here to Wawarsing, and here's the forks here, Lackawak, and Teputcoke is coming this way, and here's the Sandberg, and it cuts north. Well, that's Anchorage. But here, just to the left of Anchorage, you see the creek running north and west to this reservoir, which wasn't there then. But we find Magawasing, and that's quite a name. And it refers to a great natural granite dividing wall running down the steep slope of Honk Falls, one with a small channel down the middle. Now, the Honk Falls word is Munsee, but kind of redundant because honk means falls, the kind that runs down a mountain. And Honk Lake is also a mountain lake. So a lot of history right here, all these different spots. And these are almost presumably all fairly large and important villages right all around here, a cluster of them. The entire Rondout from what is now the reservoir down to the pools below Honk Falls was called Wagakimik, place of white American eels. And this is according to Mr. Jackson of the DEC, referring to the white phase of the American eel. So when I told him Wagakamik would mean wa is white and gakamik is an eel, he said, oh yeah, that's the American eel in its white phase. So thanks to Mr. Jackson. So it's not unusual that one part of this river would be named after its great fishing, because they really cared a lot about that, even if the river has another name. So above the reservoir, it takes another right turn, and that's here above the reservoir. It takes a right turn here, then it's still the Cahockson Kill going up to Peekamoose and heads towards Denning, New York, and goes through Peekamoose, which means Lake of Many Small Beavers. And there's a Blue Hole Lake, you know, the swimming hole they basically closed 3 years ago, seems to have been near the spot or at the spot with all the beavers. So that's all up here, far away from us and far away from Rochester. So this is very important. I did this based on my conversations with Bill and things I had been researching for years. So this is a map of this region. This is Rochester. This is the Rochester line. This is the northeast corner of Rochester as it is today. And there's at least like 8 villages that I can pretty much name. But again, the evidence, documentation is very, very sketchy, but many probable sites based on folk traditions. And it's just highly unusual. So many probable sites with lots of oral tradition have so little scholarly research and so little seen in the colonial records. And I think this is more the fault of the colonists for whatever reason in this area, in this little tiny area, they just seem to have not written everything down. So here are 8. So Resplaus, that's 1, that's up here. There's Resplaus Highway, Old Kings Highway, the Resplaus Road near Cripplebush Creek. There's almost certainly was a village, and oral tradition says this is where the Misingwe mask was first carved. You know, the scary mask that you associate with Lenape, with the red and the black halves, like day and night. Some say it is where Dr. Westbrook first saw the Misingwe mask, which he called the Mumbakas. And again, the town was named after that nearby. And that is a ritual mask honoring the Roman god Bacchus. So he took from mummers, from mask, and he added Bacchus, which is the Roman god, because he saw them doing ritual in the woods. That's the best thing you could relate it to. Okay, so that's almost for sure. Benton Bar Cemetery, well, I've often heard that, but I think there's very little evidence that it's right at the cemetery, but it would have been an interesting place. Lots of fishing, good farm. You had the dry stream bed going through though. So, you know, what would they drink? So 3, Pompey's Cave, this is in here. The Pompey's Cave Road, and at peak at the top of the hill, as I mentioned, there's the cave hole, a strategic view, foot access, drinking water, and a hiding place. Ideal for a town. And people say that's where they think it was, but there's an old stone house there now. And the idea of building a settlement right near the town kind of chases away the natives. And that's the idea. His het Kilitis land, to me, that means the Esopus land. And there's a big Dutch manor there. And it sounds like they were getting along in a friendly manner with them. Now, 5, the natural spring along Lower Kaiserreich, that lower road. And again, there's the discussion. We have to talk further about kettles. If that was corn pounding, if they're actual kettle marks, like they have those pounding holes where the women were pounding the corn, the flint corn for so long it formed kettle holes. We need to have research on that because, I have a different translation. Okay. But the villages will always be at a natural spring because it's a very year-round reliable source of water. So then the landing at Allergerville on the east side of the Rondout, right where the bridge crosses, and just to the right, I was told by local farmers that this was certainly a native village site for the Munsee. There's a bunch of cottages on the west side of the bridge, and there's a road that still goes through. And I was told that was a village. 7, this mustering field I mentioned, you saw photos, the military practice within firing distance of the crossing, but also may have been a trading post, an ideal trading post area and village site during times of peace. And everybody had to kind of go through there. The Minisink Trail was a major trail, not used for mining gold or copper or whatever. That's not the case, but it was still, there may have been various other kinds of mining and a lot of trade. Off the map, just over here, was the Pataukunk village site and the fort. And some colonial records do include that it's a Moravian praying village, and that's what the word means in Muncie. Of course, there are many better known village sites in Wawarsing, which I mentioned, but Wawarsing, Sakonessing, Napanock, Lackawack, and Shaunosburg all were definitely villages, and the names are still translatable. But in terms of what's now Rochester, there's a lot of spots, a lot of details that are still fuzzy. So that's why I'm, sending this along to you and asking people to do more research and find out like what's the deeper story. Okay, so there's just 8 village sites just in the northeast corner. And you already know, I guess, now about what we're seeing. So here's a couple of quick pictures. Whenever you go into Rochester, you see a sign that says Town of Rochester, established since 1703. Sorry about the one. That's fairly early for our area and should be proud of that. And, that they say that Manuel Gonzalez came from Spain very early and settled here. Now, along the Mason Trail, when it comes to this sign of Rochester Church, Reverend Nocella preached 1695, pretty early. Log church built 1700s. That's when a lot of settlers started coming in. 2 stone churches, 1743, 1860. 2 other churches burned. So that means 5 were burned. And the present, this one is on that same spot where all the churches burned. And it's just, I think, wonderful. It's one of the things that attracted me to this general area of New York, is just seeing this sign said, boy, those people were persistent. So this is a deed for Henry Beekman. And I just want to show this curiosity here, is that within the bounds of Marbletown, before it said on the north side of the Rondout Kill Castle, or known to be the name of Kaiserreich, beginning in a marked tree by the Rondout Kill, running northwest into the woods, in Marbletown, 1704. Well, I saw this word and it kind of looks like castle if you don't look at it too carefully. But what if it is castle? That's always a Native American, is a code word for Native American fort. If it's another word, I'd like to know. But if there was a castle there, that means that that graveyard was probably a village. So here's a couple quick pictures. We're just winding this up. So this is some photos of this restplatz, like a place of relaxation, really. And here's the where this restplatz road crosses, the not Cripplebush, but another creek. And then Restplatz community, probably preceded by an Esopus Muncie community. As I mentioned, that was where they say that this first pioneer, Westbrook, met with the Muncie village. And here's the stone houses along this. But this road is incredibly picturesque, and there's an easy view of the Shawangunk Mountains over here. You can barely see them. One of my favorite spots. So this is, here's the natural spring here, and the native villages generally sprang up around these springs. It's a reliable source of water year round. Now, Allergerville was an Esopus village on the east bank. Per tradition, and people have told me and showed me, as canoe was the standard transportation, these villages might have been on both sides of the water. So this conspicuous purple arrow is pointing to the whole arrow, to the area on the east bank of the Rondout. Here's the bridge. But it's possible it was on the other side. This is the other side. This is the west side. So they could have had matching villages. Over here, this is what you see, and the spot that people say was this village, and further on towards the river. But there's some cottages here and a dirt road, still very rustic. So that's it. So my focus is on, in this program, is the rivers and how beautiful poetically their names were. And it's a long process, possibly, to restore some of those beautiful names, but I think we should begin. It's certainly worth discussing. So that's it. And thank you. So Mike, there'll probably be some questions. Oh, and did Andrew show up? Do we see Andrew Faust come in?
I did not see him come in, so I'm not sure if he did or didn't.
Okay. Oh, I sent him the link and I said sometime after, what, 7:45. But I can't see everybody. Well, Andrew Faust is very knowledgeable about the local history and is a water expert, DEC trained, I guess, and has a sustainability center, which I'm just learning about. So I'm gonna
So-
open that to questions then, I guess.
Yeah, and if, so we all don't jump in on each other, down at the bottom, there's a hand raise feature. If people would raise their hands and let me unmute them, so we all aren't trying to talk at once, I just would appreciate that. And Kate, maybe you can, and Ashley, maybe you can sort of help me monitor hand raising, because there's about 50 people here, and that's fabulous, so.
50 people.
Where's the hand raising?
Down on the bottom in the reactions, there should be a thing that says hand raise.
Hey, Mike, Linda Tantillo is raising her hand.
Yeah,
Okay.
Is Linda related to Len Tantillo?
I saw that. Where?
Maybe.
Yeah, Linda, go ahead with your question, please. Go ahead and unmute, please.
No, actually,
Excuse-
does that work?
Yep, we have you.
I kind of hit that by mistake. Yeah, I am, that Len's my cousin. The Ancrop, there was something like Ancrop, wasn't that the name of a person, an Indian chief?
Kingston.
Possibly have been named after him?
Yeah, I think that there was a chief who took on a number of names, one of which was Ankarup.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that Kawashi Khan was another name he took. And that turns out to mean where you swim across. Because, you know, based on that Muncie, you know, I have training in Muncie language and, you know, not the only one, but, you know, love the language, and found that he had many names. And one was Ankarops, which I think, you know, naming himself after his village is actually expected, but it wouldn't be his only name. And so Kawashi Khan means the place where you swim across, you know, an estuarine tributary. Whether that was all the same spot, now it's very, very possible. But that's my comment on that, and I appreciate that's a very smart question. But yeah, I believe that he would have named himself after the town, that's the village of Ankarops, which was named after the fort, because it definitely says in, I think, Ruttenberg, I think you'll see that Ankarops was the fort.
Uh-huh.
But he also mentions Kawashi Khan, and he has another name too. So he has three names. I can't remember. The other was more of a, you know, Dutch influence name.
Thank you.
Evan, there's a question on here in the chat from Gloria. It says, did Indians live on the Mohawk property?
You know, that's a great question. I've talked, there was a fellow, I can't think of his name right now, but was the a historian at the Mohawk Preserve, and he showed me the arrowheads. And he showed me the arrowheads that I mean, he had 1,000 arrowheads, and they were in these rock shelters. There's lots of rock shelters throughout the Mohawk area, both on the current property and on property that used to be Mohawk. And there's hundreds of these rock shelters, and they were used, and he dated them back as far as about 7,000 BC, which is 9,000 years ago. And that's when they start appearing, so to speak. And then, you know, appearing in waves and crufts and disappearing for a while and coming back. And now that I know a little more, I'd like to go back and see all those arrowheads. But all these different phases of native culture. And then the question is, what is their relationship to the Muncie really? And they all have some influence on how the Muncie turned out. There was like Fox Creek, for example. I remember there was Fox Creek, and that's time of Christ. And they were the ones that had the idea of having like this whole river-based kind of civilization, which the Muncie warmly embraced and became a riverine culture. So that one, and Fox Creek faded out. But yeah, if you ever want to really study this, go whoever is now in charge of that history at Mohonk, they have those thousands of arrowheads, but you kind of have to know arrowheads. But they're mostly in the rock shelter, so that definitely goes back 9,000 years. Okay, and where there were Munsee villages there, that I don't know. Okay, because the Dutch came, and Mohonk. By the way, the river which you call the Wallkill was originally called the Mohonk River, and that's in the maps and deeds from around the time of the Great 1677 Agreement or New Paul's Patent. And so Mohonk is like the Great Rock, and people have tried to, nay that, but it's true. It just means Mog means the greatest of all, and Honk is a big rock, and so it's the biggest rock of all, the biggest, and that refers to Skytop for sure. And these are stories about Anchorops, for example, the chief going by and showing all this to the Dutch and saying, "This is what you're buying." So it's pretty clear. So,
Suzanne, we'll go ahead and move to your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
yes,
Okay, I just want to thank you for this talk. It was really fascinating and I enjoyed it very much. My family is Dutch and I have a little bit of rudimentary Dutch, and it's not what it should be, but I was just thinking when you talked about Sandburg, that it needn't refer to a specific person, but like a burg as a town or a village. And couldn't that just mean like a town or a village that was built out of sand? Because it's a sandy area from what you were describing. So I thought it just might be just a descriptive term. That was
Wow,
just my
okay.
thought. Yeah.
Okay, but doesn't it also mean a hill?
It could, but a burg can also mean like a town, like a community.
Right, that's true. I hadn't really thought of that. So it was definitely a sand there. There's a sandy field that the Sandburg goes through.
Right.
And I just wanted to make the point, it wasn't about a man named Sandburg. It was definitely geographic and therefore possibly following a native example.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And so, yes, if there was a village, the natives, instead of calling it, like I thought, Rechawanis for a sandy stream, it could have been Rechatan, which would be a sandy village.
Right.
And then the Dutch following through. So either way, it works.
Right.
That's great.
It's nice that it's so descriptive, right?
Yes, they're very descriptive names. They're very poetic and relevant. And also, they named places after themselves. They named after the place itself and the beauty of the place, and almost always what you could eat there, by the way. So
Right.
what's for dinner? What's for lunch? That was always the question. But they didn't name that. They rarely named it after a chief. The chief would name himself after the land. So you don't have, like in the colonial culture, it's all about, who's the big boss and let's name everything after, Washington, Jefferson, and Madison.
Right.
And they had a different way, which was to honor the earth above all. And I think that's a good thing. And
Yeah.
part of why I think it matters what you call something is that I believe that we should honor the earth more passionately.
Yes, I agree. And thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, by the way, Mike, did you make a recording of this?
We did, and it is also being broadcast out right now live on the Town of Rochester's YouTube channel. But
Okay.
it will be stored there, and after this session, it goes off for a brief period of time, but it reappears again after about 10 to 12 hours. I'm guessing it's something to do with a conversion that YouTube has to do.
Okay.
So it will be stored there moving forward, and I'm guessing it will reappear tomorrow if it follows the trend of our town board meetings. So
Will that be posted at a website?
yeah, I'm gonna make a copy. I'm recording it on my computer as well as that, and I'm gonna make a copy and get it to Kate for the Friends of Historic Rochester, and then we can figure out how to get it out on a website.
Good. Good. Well, I think it turned out pretty well. Okay, Bert, I see we have the distinction from Linda. Oh, Michael
Hey,
Coleman.
Michael Coleman, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for the river map.
Absolutely, and I love what you did with the maps. It looks fantastic. Good to see you again, by the way. So a quick question, you keep talking about we should start renaming these rivers. So when you say we, so who names rivers? How would we go about doing that? Is that the town? Is that Ulster County? Is that the state? What's the process to rename river to one of these native names.
Well, I didn't say it was easy. But yeah, that there is caught me off guard that somebody may know more off the top of their head
Yeah,
how to describe
actually,
the process.
Michael, I can kind of address that is you have to approach, and there is a specific department of the federal government, and I will have to research exactly where it is, and you submit this, and then they do their whatever they do, and then get
diligence.
back to you and basically tell you if you can. It is a very long process, but it can be done. And it's through your GIS, I'm sure you know, there's an agency that is sort of the keeper of all the official names, and that's the agency that you have to go through, but I don't remember the specific title.
Well, I think that the word landmarks is involved, right?
Yeah, it's something along those lines,
Yeah,
but
landmarks.
But it's definitely a federal and not a state.
it is a federal, not a state, yes.
Okay.
But it can be done, and actually, we did get a new designation a few years back for the Mumbakis to be changed from the Rochester, or did I say that backwards? I
No,
may
you
have-
said it
No, I said it correctly.
correctly. Yeah.
Change the Rochester to back to the Mumbakis.
Yeah.
But
Well,
there
that's
was
a
a
step.
process that had to be done.
Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so that's a good step. But yeah, and another thing, like I said, in Wales, they use parenthetical subtitles for all their signs because every place is, the Welsh names are remembered. Some of them are very long, as you know, and the English. So they use subtitles. And I think in Canada, you see that too. And that would be educational. It's my view. I'm not sure you have to go through the federal government to have a parenthetical subtitle. That might be state. Oh, of course. Yes, in Ireland, definitely. But the Welsh really caused a kind of in parts of it. Yes, the Welsh really raised a ruckus over that and got their parenthetical signs. I think before some of the Irish. So more questions are good. On a roll.
Okay, any other questions?
That me?
Okay.
You see me?
Betsy,
Rick?
we have hand raised there.
Yeah,
Ryden's also trying to ask a question.
is that all right? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Rick. Go ahead, then Betsy, we'll
Okay.
come back to you. Yep.
Yeah, I hope I didn't take someone else's spot. But there's a little hamlet between Cohonson and Sampsonville called Tabasco.
Mhm.
And everyone in that area doesn't seem to know or have any idea why it's called Tabasco. And I was thinking when you're showing your maps, you had a name there, Topatcoke, Tobacco,
Right.
Tabasco. I mean, it sounds similar. I didn't know if, but it wasn't in the right spot. But the only Tabasco I could ever find that in the war with Mexico in 1848, there was two battles fought down in southern Mexico. The Battle of Tabasco. I thought maybe somebody from up in that between Sampsonville and Cohonson probably was in the army or was killed or wounded or in Tabasco, Mexico. But I would think it could be American Indian too. So because
Well,
that's
it could-
amazing.
Well,
Go
the
ahead.
word tobacco is also, well, I guess it's
Sure.
technically Taino, but adopted into Algonquin was a similar word for tobacco,
Okay.
which is of course very, very important.
Sure.
It goes way back thousands of years. And so Tabasco could be a place of small tobacco, maybe, because they use the word tobacco, like in Port Tobacco in Maryland. You ever heard of that town? It's really a play on Potobacco, which is an Algonquin word. So they named it like a field of tobacco to Potobacco, and they changed it to Port Tobacco because the English wanted to use it as a port, and so then they could remember it. So there's a good example of how close we are. So I think there's a possibility, and other Algonquins have said they think it means small tobacco too. But it certainly, could go for further research. Tabasco, and I like what you said is like similar to Pat Coke, but there would have to be one of those boiling cauldrons of water there. So I don't know if there is, but that's certainly a great question.
Thank you. Who's up
Okay.
next?
Yeah, Betsy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi. My question or observation was because I was been looking at old maps, and an old map I got from the town, I believe.
Mhm.
And I don't know the date of it, but it does have Wawarsing as a separate town.
Mhm.
What I can make out was and then would Lake Owasting being Wawarsing at that point?
Yes.
Okay, so what this looks like is Lake Owasting, and it has, can barely make it out, Peter Pond. So
Mhm. Mhm.
maybe that was switched back to Owasting. At some point it was Peter, which would then be, make sense of Peterskill. So I was
Mhm.
wondering about that.
Mhm. Right. Well, it did seem that it was called Lake Owasting a long time ago, because I asked the county to look into it, and they actually did. And so they said, yeah, it was Owasting. And of course, Freed actually wrote about it in the long footnote about saying that it makes sense that they would have used that word because it shows up in the Dongan patent for the larger region. So that, he said, that's good enough for me, and he tends to like to be a tough customer. So that's a pretty good test. So it was Lake Owasting for sure. And then changed, to the other name I mentioned, and then changed back to Owasting to restore, the history of it. But yeah, in terms of the name, there's a person that was named after a Peter somebody. It's a long last Dutch name. I think the last name, I have it in my notes. His first name is Peter, was the son of somebody who had bought it. So we know who Peter is, but he weren't native. But the thing is that what was it called before it was called the Peterskill? Well, so far we can only conjecture, and the only theory so far that is on anyway is that they generally would name the stream after its source, like the Coxing was named after its source because it's a high place. And so whatever it was, we don't know, but it comes from a Owasting lake, which is a real thing. And so you see you can see why I put an asterisk. But that's a reconstruction.
Okay, thank you very much, and I loved your presentation.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I there's a book. I think it's the Mark Freed's book on place names in the Shawangungs. He explains about the name of Peter and his family, and that Owasting is a real legitimate term.
So, but Owasting is the original Indian name?
You got to read Freed, but yeah, that's the idea, and I believe it. I believe
Okay.
it's like 90% likely.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that that has an original name, right?
It is how you say, an authentic name. It is a Munsee word, and it was used in the entire region. So yeah, makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
We have somebody that's listed as iPhone. I'm not sure who it is. It just says iPhone.
That actually might be
That
me.
is you. That is you.
I raised my hand. Hi, Evan. Thanks so much for doing this tonight. I did come in late, so I've missed quite a bit of it. So I'm interested in watching the recording. But my question is, so I live in a section of Kerhonkson that's called Cherrytown. I also live on a road called Cherry Lane. So there's a lot of cherry references.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you knew anything about that at all.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a Cherrytown Road up on the hill in Sampsonville too. Very
Yeah.
important and right in the middle of the old, another probable Muncie settlement. Cherries, yeah, that, maybe Bill knows more about that. Bill, are you still there? Because you live up near Cherry Hill there. And it's reflexive, the cherry you're talking about is on the other side of the water, but it's still, cherry. But they had cherries. They had, by the way, choke cherries. And when you wait until this time of year, they're no longer poisonous. You just got to know when to kind of pick them because they are red. And when they look pretty in red, then you really can't eat them. You'll really get sick. But this time of year, they start to turn black. And when they're black, you can eat them. So that part of the cherry family I know about. But the birds, they say, the Lenape say the birds used to eat all the cherries before the humans could get to them. And so according to the story, people prayed to the creator, Kishlamokong, and so he made plums because the birds don't eat the plums. They're too big. They can't get in there. So they say that the cherries they couldn't eat them. It was very frustrating. But the plums, the birds let us eat them. But they did eat cherries, of course. And they had, by the way, Johnny cake or journey cake is a Native American dish. And you can look it up in the New England, cookbook, whatever that book is called. I'm sure you have a copy somewhere from your mom, but it says that the shortbread cakes and the, strawberries and cherries and all this, that was the Native American food. And they use it for journeying, taken with them.
What was that again? Journey cake? You had me at cake, so now I'm interested.
Well, yeah, they would make the cornbread cakes. They're Native American, and they call it sampsis. And then they would cover it with deer fat, which of course sounds great. And then would put sweeten like maple sugar, but they would put like strawberries and maybe I don't know about cherries, depending on where you were. But these were Native American dishes that the colonists adopted.
Interesting. I did see Bill pop up there really quick. I don't know if he wanted to add anything about Cherrytown.
Yeah, I would like to hear what Bill has to say.
Yeah, actually, there are the choke cherries. There are also wild cherry trees up here that we have, and very large as well. The black cherry. So they do also. They're not like your sweet black cherries per se that you buy in the grocery store, but they do produce cherries as well. And those fruits were dried typically, and as Evan indicates, they were added to other types of food, like the corn-based journey cakes.
All right, great.
But,
Alice, you had
all the berries, the
sorry.
huckleberries, the strawberries, everything. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, Alice Cross was trying to get everybody's attention. So you were next there, Alice. Yep, you got to unmute yourself, Alice. I'm sorry.
I hear you.
Okay,
There
Okay.
we
you hear
go.
me?
Yes.
Yeah.
My question was, what is the origin of Schwangunk?
My favorite question. Because I have opinions about things. And, there's two translations. One is the Dutch and one is the native. I wrote about this, not only in Native New Yorkers, but several other of my little publications. But, okay, so in Muncie is pretty clear. Shawan means south. An is a pathway. There's just no doubt about that. And Gunk is a mountain or a valley between two mountains, depending on the plural. And so they allied syllables together. So Shawan, is south. And you can look that up in Omera, which is the most scholarly reference to Omera. Also in my book called Lenape Words and Phrases. But you go and they would ally that like this with An, which is a pathway. So a Shawan An Gunk. It's the valley or the mountains really where you travel south. And the Shawangunks do go quite far south if you follow them. And then the Dutch came along, always playing with the words. And I want to tell you a story, Alice. I think I was in some crazy place like Lapland or something above the Arctic Circle when I met this Dutch mariner who travels around the world. And I said that, your people go around renaming everything with wordplay. Is you still do that? He said, oh, we're very proud of doing that, which just puts our touch on everything. He says, we just name everything. We play with the words and change them. And I was like, you realize it's very confusing. So like I said, I don't really care. So anyway, they still do it. So they took Shawangunk, and Shun is beautiful. And, Kum is like a comb or a crest. And at Sam's Point, you have a beautiful white crest on the top of that ridge, which is very remarkable. You can see it for miles in the sun. And Shongum. So when people say Shongum, they often insist that's the only way to pronounce it because they're Dutch. And then if you have an Algonquin person, they're going to say Shawangunk is the only way to pronounce it because that's where you go south. And in fact, they're both right because it's two different cultures describing the same thing. But that's my very strongly held opinion.
You. Very interesting.
We have any more questions? I just wanted to, Michael, I did a quick Google search. It's the United States Board on Geographic Names, and it was formed in the United States in 1890. So that is who we will have to reach out to change the names.
Well, yeah, thank you. That's saved me hours of getting on my head against the wall. But the thing is that I feel that there are places around within the bounds of Rochester where the names of rivers and things are very, very confusing. That's just my opinion as somebody who lives right over the border in High Falls. I just can't. It took me a long time to unscramble all these different names. Like they have like a couple feet of the river we call one thing, and then it's another thing, and then the Rondout goes like right up this Minnesota Creek, but it doesn't. It's a branch, but it's not a branch. So there's a lot of, I feel, very confusing things that would be better if we just simplified and just use the native names, or use it, as a parenthetical. But
Well,
I think there's some serious restructuring that needs to be done.
You wanted to add something else, Alistair?
It's a big, big hassle to get it changed. And I think the idea of having both names on the sign, at least in some instances, would be much more interesting, much easier, just as effective. And because when you get involved with the government, as we found when Mark Freed did Mombacus, they have to change all their maps. It's a big deal. So why not just put the old name on the same sign, except we have to have a bigger sign?
A little bigger, just a bit bigger. Okay, well, thank you. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is needed, at least the parenthetical. And I'm all for, ease of success. But it should be, of course, up to everyone, to vote on. I don't know who votes on these things. Like
Charge of the names, because we had to change a lot of names when they put in 911 locations instead of RFD. And we changed a lot of the names, and I don't know whether it was the county or the town allowed us to research and reestablish some historic names. And that didn't seem to be a big deal. So I don't know if Mike would know, or whether that's town or county.
That road names are through I believe through county, but it may be through state. But I believe road names are done through county. So changing a road name is a little bit easier. You don't have quite quite the hurdle. But trying to change the name of a mapped place other than a road is very difficult, because as Alice said, they have to then change an awful lot of documentation. So,
by the way, I should mention here that I did some volunteer work with the Rondout Watershed Alliance, and we made a map that I added, the native names to the rivers where it was definite and where it was a river. And those are easily available through the, friends of, I guess, the Rondout Watershed Alliance. And we have plenty of it. And Becky Martin has a big box of those and can make more. So that's, I meant to mention that at some point, because in gold letters, they have in print underneath, they have the parenthetical that said it was also, and they gave the native name. And just a little bit, I mean, it's just the beginning, because it's just a physical brochure. But I strongly recommend people looking at that for inspiration. It's a map of the entire Rondout watershed, which is a big area.
We could use your maps.
Yeah,
Just-
well, I helped make that map.
Oh,
It's
print
one
it
of my,
up.
I don't want to say it's one of my maps, but I certainly, was based on my linguistics.
Print it up and have a little blurb to go with it. We can give it out at the museum. Or we can print it in the accordion.
Yes, that would be nice. So I have a box of them too. If you want to see the brochures, I got them, and I can email them to, people. I can email one to you, Alice, and you can email it to anybody. Okay. It's a nice map, and it's just the beginning. It was cheaper than changing all the signs. We just made a map and we put in the parenthetical.
Have to start somewhere.
So
Yeah, I
just,
think it's significant. It's a significant map.
so just a quick, there's a comment in the chat from Anne Marie, who is in charge of membership. So if anybody is not a member, would like to join the Friends of Historic Rochester, I believe it's still a $25 a year dues. But with that, you get the accordion, you get the, is it still 4 editions of the accordion? Yep, 4. And her email is there in the chat, but it's amm4674@gmail.com. So a little plug for the Friends of Historic Rochester. Alice brought me into it, I don't know, about 12 years ago, when she said, can you come help us with our presentation and help straighten out our VCR? And the next thing I knew, I was on the board of directors. So it's a great organization. The museum is an amazing place filled with a lot of information. And I see we've got one more question here. The gentleman that was on the iPhone. Let's get, I don't want to.
Yes, gentleman on the iPhone. Hi. One last question. I know we're running late. So it's my understanding is that the Muncie Indians were eventually pushed out west. I feel like they're maybe in Montana or something like that. I'm not sure, but I was just curious if anyone had ever reached out to any of them or spoken to them, or if there's any sort of information that they have on their history in this area or anything like that. I don't know if any of that was brought up tonight.
Yeah, there's definitely, there's a lot of them. It wasn't a small group, and the Muncie are still here, and Edequa is chatting in that she's knowledgeable, but this is as am I. I studied the Muncie language in Muncie Town in Canada, but also there are Muncie descendants in all 50 states, especially Oklahoma, where they adopted in with the Cherokee. But I could give you 2 hours on the story of the Muncie Exodus, but I have a whole chapter in my book, Native New Yorkers. But also Mark Peters, who was a former chief of the Muncie people in Canada, is going to be speaking in Kingston. And give me 1 second. On the 9th of October, middle of the day at the Pearson House, the former Grand Chief of the, of the Canadian Muncie, Mark Peters, a very knowledgeable man, will be speaking. And the question is, they wanted me to speak with him, and I may have a schedule conflict. I'm not sure I can get out of, but there's an Indigenous Day on October 9th, which of course is the weekend formerly known as Columbus Day. And so we're doing some Indigenous teaching. I may or may not be able to be there, but you should definitely go. The man is incredible, Mark Peters. And he was the one who helped me write Native New Yorkers, by the way. Without him, I couldn't have done it. Because back in 2001, back in the grand old days, there was nothing out there, no books about Muncie. So, just, you got to look it up. I don't know how you find out otherwise, but contact the Pearson House. And that's how I would know. I don't have like all that, additional contact for that. But the Pearson House is very prominent in Kingston. It's one of the oldest houses in Kingston. That's Saturday, October 9th. So yeah, if you want to know, that's a 1 in a million opportunity. He hardly ever comes to the United States. In fact, under COVID, I'm sure he went through a lot of trouble to get here.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Alice, what would you?
I saw it on the screen here. Somebody typed it in. Last night, there was a webinar from what's it called now? Historic Huguenot Street,
right.
Which is on, I could send it to anybody, but there was a representative, an Indigenous person from Canada.
Mark Peters.
Maybe the same place. I didn't get his name. I have to look it up again.
It was Mark Peters, yes.
Was?
Yeah.
Did you? Okay.
I couldn't make it.
One from Oklahoma and a woman, Indigenous woman from Wisconsin, talking about how their people got to those communities. Fabulous. It's on YouTube, and if you contact Historic Huguenot Street, there was another note on here, but I didn't see what it was. If you contact Historic Huguenot Street, I would think that they could link you with the recording of that last night, because it interweaves with what everybody has said tonight. It was fabulous.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I forgot to mention that too. Yeah. So that you might get a recording earlier, and then you might want to go on October 9th to see and meet Mark Peters. Very good. Thank you, Alice. So there's your answer. But yeah, all 50 states, Mexico and Canada. And I have a lot of stories about those migrations. And they were tough. They were very hard. So Onaquaga is a town on the Susquehanna River, now called Windsor, New York. And that was their main destination for the first leg of their journey to all 50 states. They'd go up 17, which was a trail called the East-West Trail. And there was a back road from Rochester area, which nobody seems to know exactly the route, probably the Walrusing Trail, but ending up again on 17, going through this to Onaquaga, which is an island on the Susquehanna River. And there's one obscure book about it, which I read, but there's, during the revolution, the Sullivan's campaign made a point of destroying that village. But they described that there were 2 Muncie villages just south of that crossing of the Susquehanna. And they were considered beautiful and very sophisticated buildings and towns. And of course, then Butler says, we got to burn them down. Sullivan campaign. And so they burned down these 2 native villages, which were Muncie villages, by the way. So there's your history. And then they move further and they move to Chemung and all the places along the Susquehanna going west. And they're still there. There's a lot of Muncie there. And then in a chain going to Muncie, Indiana, for example, not surprising. And all these places in every state. And helping establish what became the United States of America. So it's a great question. So in Native New Yorkers, there's a whole chapter called the Lenape Exodus. Okay. I'm sorry if you can't find the Person House. It's, the part of their all weekend festivities for Indigenous Peoples Day. That's all I know.
Yeah, I actually just tried to find information, and the Person House website only goes up through the end of September at this point, it looks like. It does appear they have an event happening though. Well, actually, I think maybe it was tonight, September 17th, or unless I looked at the date wrong. But they only go through, it looks like their website is not accurate right now. So.
Well, COVID has made a mess of some of these kind of things. So yeah, just keep looking. It'll go online probably October 1st with the information,
Yeah.
but it's definitely happening. And I just don't know the time yet. I don't think they've decided the time. But you know, time is a fuzzy thing in Algonquin anyway.
Kate, would you like to sort of leave us here with a little bit of a plug for our Heritage Day, October 2nd?
All right. So I was taking notes and Ashley was researching things, but as we were getting the answers, some of you guys were answering them for us. But there was a resident in our town that had a creek named, and I'm going to reach out to him and see the process he went for designating a creek and see if that can help us along the way as well. I just want to say we had 49 participants tonight, and we had 7 people show up. So that was a very successful annual meeting. And I want to thank both Bill and Evan for putting this presentation together, because it was excellent. And so with that, so Heritage Day is scheduled for October 2nd, starting at 11 a.m. We are going to have Historic Main Street Walk. We're going to have the unveiling of the Historic Main Street sign. We will have vendors, the annual Janny Bell Pie Festival, several youth activities and crafts at the community center. We'll have live music by Mr. O and Breakaway. We have an antique car show. The train depot will be doing scheduled tours. We have hay rides, touch a truck with the fire company, a quilt show. The Ulster County Sheriff Office is coming out with a dive tank. Our ECC will be doing a series of presentations and selling wood-fired pizza. And we will be concluding the evening with a candlelight vigil at 7 p.m. in memory of Alice Schoonmaker and Rich Ryder, and followed by fireworks at the town park at 8 p.m. Our museum will be open. I come one, come all. I think it'll be a great day for people of all ages, and really hope everyone would spread the word and come and see what our organizations have to offer.
Starts at 11 a.m.
And it starts at 11 a.m. And if anybody wants to volunteer or participate in any way, feel free to reach out to myself or Ashley Sweeney in the rec department. And we hope to see you all there.
And just for people's information too, parking will be at Town Hall because Main Street will be closed. But we will have parking for accessible parking for those that need closer parking in the parking lot behind the museum and the firehouse. But for those who are able to park at the Town Hall and walk back to Main Street, we ask that you do that. And that way we were able to close down Main Street to use for the vendors. So we hope you'll all come out and enjoy it. And I want to thank the town board for allowing the town to fund the fireworks. It was something Kate really wanted, and originally we were going to ask for donations, and we decided that with COVID and all that's been going on, we found the money from our celebrations line, and we'll be funding the fireworks.
And thank you, Mike, for coming down tonight and getting the Zoom set up, and
no problem.
the YouTube. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Thanks.
With that, I don't think there's more questions, and we will adjourn the annual meeting at 9 p.m.
On the dot, pretty much.
Pretty good.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley.
Good night.
Have a great
Thank
night.
you.